when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I couldn't think of anything that really made sense other than like, I'll be a doctor because I've
Right.
got doctors in the family. So whenever I would say that, people would go, "Oh, that's so great." And
It's admirable. Go for it. You're smart.
yeah, exactly. Kind of, pat me on the back or whatever. And it felt good, but it didn't feel really genuine to me when I would say that.
Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Own Your Awkward podcast. I am super excited today to have another amazing podcast host, a learner, lifelong learner from Superhumans, Arik Korman. He hosts the Arik Korman Show. Local Seattle guy, has done a lot in the community in the entertainment industry as well. Arik, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. My son went to school today, and so that is always good when that happens.
When the day starts out on plan, that's always a good way to start the day, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned your son. You start out with that because that you lead with that right in your podcast as the purpose for the discovery that you're on with learning from other people. And maybe this is what you're going to say, but I like to start out asking everybody, what's the most positive thing that you see right now in the world?
Wow. Okay, that is an interesting question because there's a lot that is kind of overwhelming right now. What do they call it? Like a perpetual crisis that's going on. If you think
Right.
about climate change and the economy and the Ukraine-Russia war and the political situation and the divisiveness that we're seeing in our country, there's a lot to be worried about.
For
And
sure.
when I get kind of worried about all of that stuff, I think about our kids. And I talk to people who are in college or people who are still in grade school or middle school or high school, and they have ideas for the future. And I get inspired just by listening to them. And I realize that these are our future leaders and they're optimistic. They've got a plan. So I think everything's going to be okay.
That's a great perspective because we inherit things in life, right? We don't know what we're going to get, but sometimes we can see it coming, and so we have to start planning. And it might be that we're in, a different point in life than someone else, and we see the next stage coming, or we see a new job we're going to take on, and we know how it was left. But I hadn't seen that perspective of them having the foresight to have plans for what's coming down the road for the world they're inheriting.
Yeah, like for example, my son, he's only 13 right now, but he's talking about how he wants to build, say, a huge desalination plant that could provide clean water from the ocean to a city the size of LA. And
Wow.
so, yeah, I mean that's just like him riffing on what he wants to do. That and building flying cars and teleportation machines.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you just amplify that times the millions of kids that are out there and billions, really, if you think about it.
Right.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's amazing. It just reminds me, I was just yesterday at a a showcase for collaborators who are in an incubator program with the Washington Maritime Blue, and everything they do is sustainable. And there's one guy there whose program is to pull carbon out of the air and turn it into graphite to create products that we need. And another one that's working on boats that don't use propellers, that don't use a blade, to make flying boats essentially. And you just look at these things that people are coming up with that you don't even realize how much there's a need for something like that. And to have this, someone at 13 have this plan to be able to get clean water to one of the largest cities that we have, that's amazing, the foresight.
Yeah. Now, granted, he hasn't scoped it out to the point where he can build it tomorrow, but at least he
Sure.
has the concept.
Well, and it starts with the dream, right? You got to have that dream, and then you can start creating the learnings that you need in order to fill in the gaps of what you need to know.
Yep.
That's amazing. Well, that's great. I can't wait to see that developing over the next few years.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, Arik, I bring everybody on. I put them on the spot. I like to tell them the world wants to know what your awkward is because we all have something. So, what is that awkward you've had to own in order to live your best life?
Now, are we talking about an experience that happened to us, just to be clear, or is it more of a characteristic?
Typically people lead with a characteristic, but sometimes people have an event that created a turning point. So however you want to define that is, we don't have a lot of rules here. If there, really is about what is something that really has changed your life by saying, I've had to either deal with or accept this, either situation or characteristic, and now I can use that in a good way.
Okay, well, if we're going to go in that direction, what I can tell you is that growing up in Southern California, where I did, and I lived there until I was 18, it was, especially outside of LA. I lived about 90 minutes east of LA in a town called Redlands, and that was at a time where it was kind of like a John Hughes movie, if you remember, like The Breakfast Club and all that stuff. And so, everybody wanted to be, well, not everybody, but a lot of people wanted to be among the popular crowd and so on. And the way to do that in the Inland Empire in Southern California was basically you needed to be an athlete. You needed to be like on the football team or a jock, because nothing else was really valued, at least in the culture that I was growing up in. And so I tried being a football player. I went out for the football team in ninth grade, and there weren't really any cuts, so I think they let me in just because they let everybody in. I was a pretty good wide receiver at 5'8" and 110 pounds at the time. I did well in school, so I learned the routes. I didn't make any mistakes when it came to where I was supposed to be. I hardly ever dropped the ball when it was thrown to me. I had pretty good hands.
You're doing all the right things.
I was doing all the right things, except I wasn't the fastest kid on the team.
Oh,
so I didn't make first string, which was kind of unfortunate, because I thought, well, I know the routes better than the guy who is the first string player. He drops the ball. I don't drop the ball. Why did he get the nod? But he was faster than me, and that was really it. And he was also a little bit taller than me too. I think he was like 5'10" or something like that. So I still did the thing. I got on the team buses and went to the games, and I felt like, hey, I'm in this crowd that is where I wanted to be. It was kind of fun too, because like the girls volleyball team would come along, or the girls softball team, and there was this rapport that I was never really part of before, because I was a nerd. I was an academic type. That's what I was. And finally, after the 4 games of just sitting on the bench, and when the 5th game came about, it was against our biggest rival. It was another junior high school, because our schools were 7, 8, 9 instead of 6, 7, 8 for middle school, so they call it junior high.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So ninth grade, even though I'm technically a freshman in high school, I was the top of the class in my junior high school. So anyway, it was against the rival junior high school. The game was at the University of Redlands Stadium. There were 2,000 people there, which we never saw for any of the other games, because they were not in a university stadium. They were just at another school field. So we were up like 21-0 in this game against our arch rival. And the coach finally said, all right, Korman, you can go ahead and get in the game. But I didn't get a chance to play wide receiver, which is the position that I'd been training for all these weeks. He put me in as defensive back. So I had to be the one guarding. And during practices, occasionally I would play defense. And I was never one to really throw my body around and try to, give these big hits on people. It just wasn't my thing, because I weighed 110 pounds.
There's just some physical attributes at play there that make a difference, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I would kind of get through those parts of the practice where I had to play defense, but I never really enjoyed it. But hey, I get to go into a game and actually play for the first time, so I was super pumped up. The adrenaline was flowing. I run onto the field, and the ball gets snapped to the quarterback of the other team. And what you do as a defensive back is you start by backpedaling. You run backwards to watch what the wide receiver is doing in case they do like a quick turn or something like that.
Sure.
But then when they, because there's about a 5 yard difference between where you are and where the other wide receiver is. But when they get up to where you are, you're supposed to turn around and then run with them. Well, I started backpedaling so quickly that my momentum just carried my feet over my head. And I did like this perfect backward somersault. But the receiver that I was supposed to cover just kept on going, and guess what? He was wide open. And the quarterback of the other team saw that he was wide open, threw the ball to him. He caught it and ran for a touchdown.
Oh no!
On my watch, the biggest game of the year in front of 2,000 people, and I was absolutely mortified. I mean, I just could not believe what just happened. Because this is a game that we really wanted to win,
right?
and so I just pretty much ran off the field at that point and tried to make myself disappear.
Yeah.
And my teammates were saying to me, well, what happened out there? It looked like maybe the other guy tripped you or what, but I just couldn't bring myself to tell him that the other guy didn't even touch me.
Right.
It was just me running backwards too fast, and I tripped over my own feet basically and gave up that score. So that was pretty much the end of my football career.
Okay.
At that point.
That was one of my questions was running in through my head was, did you get back out there on the field? And
no. In fact, I didn't even ask to go back into that game. And now, because the margin of victory was only 2 scores instead of 3 scores, the coaches wanted to make sure that they actually won.
Right.
So, and I didn't ask, and that was that. I went in the very last game on a kickoff, which again is not something that I had really practiced for. We were on the kicking team. There's like a little string that holds your shoulder pads together, and it broke somehow. And so I'm here. I am like on the field. The string that's holding my shoulder pads together had somehow broken, and so I'm running, and the shoulder pads are flopping around, and I'm thinking, the last thing I want to do is try to tackle somebody because I'll get hurt. And that was it. That was the only other time I was in, is one play in the very last game that didn't really count for anything. So and I ended up pulling like both of my Achilles tendons also around that time. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was just kind of insult to injury in a way, or injury to insult, I guess, in this case.
Well, and you mentioned just a range of emotions there through that experience between, stepping into this camaraderie with being on a team that you hadn't experienced before, and then going through that to the excitement of getting into being in the game, and then mortified from the results. What did you take from that experience as you moved into other things that you endeavored that might have been out of your comfort zone?
Well, what I realized is my dream of playing football, because I loved football since I was 18 months old. I mean, I watched my dad watching it, and so I was an LA Rams fan. I know that doesn't go over well in Seattle, but I've switched. I'm now a Seahawks fan and have been for a long time. But when I was 18 months old, I walked around with a football helmet on my head all the time, like during the day.
Right.
I would put on my Rams helmet and it didn't come off. And so during elementary school, whenever there was recess, we'd play football. I was usually the quarterback or the wide receiver, on offense, and do whatever needed to be done on defense. So it was just part of my DNA. And I also played tennis. I did get into that once I got a little bit older. So that helped. I transitioned to tennis in a bigger way.
Okay.
So that helped. It's not the same thing though, because that's more of an individual sport, and I played singles instead of doubles. So yeah, you're part of a tennis team, which I was, but it didn't have the same feeling as a football team, because you didn't need to rely on each other in the same way, and the camaraderie wasn't the same, because the folks are kind of trying to outdo each other in tennis, because you're kind of jockeying for position to be either on the varsity team and stay off the junior varsity if you can, and there's like the ranking, like, are you the number 1 player on your team, or are you number 2 or number 3? So it just wasn't as supportive as football, that strange as that might sound.
Well, yeah, there's when you have a sport where you're relied on as a team to make plays together, you could, like you say, the difference between a tennis team where you're all individually playing to score better for your school versus we're not going to make this play if we're not communicating, if we're not in sync, if I don't know to automatically run this direction based on the play we're calling without having to have someone sit down and explain it to me. Okay, Eric, we need you to go over here and do this. It does create a completely different level of connection and reliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. And so there was I think a bit of a grieving process that I went through because of that, because just having this idea of playing football, having to let that go, and then know that this is not my thing. And it's knowing what I know now about football, I'm really glad that I didn't stay in it.
Okay.
Just because of the injuries that happen, and playing football in the high desert in Southern California. I mean, where I was, it was 90 degrees or hotter from April through November.
Wow.
So when we were doing practices in August, it would be over 100 degrees, and you're doing wind sprints in pads.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brutal to do that.
Yeah.
And so even just that,
yeah.
And not to mention, again, getting hit by people who are heavier than you are.
Right. Knock the wind out of you when the air is already lighter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just not a good thing. So I had to make peace with that.
Now, did you find that it was hard to watch football for a while, or was it hard to stay in love with the sport when you weren't able to play it?
Well, I play for fun whenever I could. Sure. So that helped. It was there was a little bit of bittersweet, feelings about it, but I still enjoyed watching it. And, didn't really diminish my love of the game itself. And now it's kind of a guilty pleasure, again, knowing what I know about the head injuries and the overall toll that it takes on people's bodies and so on. But yeah, it did kind of color my view of it. And it also taught me that I do want to find some sort of like team experience like that. And when I got into actual high school, I tried out contest speaking. So there's actually and I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's an organization called the NFL, the National Forensic League.
Yeah. Yes, I have heard of that.
Yeah. So the National Forensic League, was my NFL. So I got into public speaking and doing speaking competitions as part of our speech team at my high school.
Nice.
So that sort of replaced all of that. And it obviously, public speaking is not a contact sport.
Sure. You're safe from that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it doesn't have the rankings in the way that, say, a tennis team does. So the team was genuinely supportive. And there were both individual rankings, or you could win like first place in extemporaneous speaking, or first place in impromptu speaking, or humorous interpretation, or dramatic interpretation, or debate.
Right.
And the more trophies that you win for your team, the better, and people celebrated, and there was this cohesion, and we went to different schools to compete, just like sports.
Right.
And that was really nice.
Definitely. That probably gave you a great start to where you are now with all the speaking that you do, and with the chance to talk to people so much with your interviews that sometimes we find something we're passionate about that we don't even know, and it comes from not necessarily a mistake. Sometimes it's just we step off the path or a detour in life and then fall in love with something.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I didn't know what I was going to do with the public speaking, though, at the time. It just seemed like something interesting. Mm-hmm. In fact, my favorite kind of speaking was called impromptu, where you would have a list of 3 different topics that would be handed to you. You would have 30 seconds to look at your list of 3 different topics. And then you'd have to give a 5-minute speech based on what you choose after that 30 seconds of trying to decide. Yeah. And then you can't use any notes. You just go.
Right. So you've got to make it up on the fly.
You make it up on the fly. Exactly. And that's what I enjoyed more than anything else. But I didn't know how I could really apply that to anything. And when I was growing up, especially in my teen years, my parents told me, whatever you do not go into show business.
Oh, really?
Yep. That's right, because it from their perspective, it was such a chancy, risky sort of endeavor.
Mhm.
I had a cousin that tried to become a singer, and the best she could do was become a waitress at a restaurant where the waitresses were allowed to sing. And so I
Okay.
said, "Oh,
Yeah.
you're going to end up like your cousin, if you get into
Mhm.
show business."
Yeah.
So I didn't see the connection at the time.
Now, was there something that you were demonstrating, like an interest in show business that prompted them to say that, or was it just kind of a standard, don't go into show business?
Well, I'd done some theater work.
Mhm.
I went to a drama like summer camp between my sixth and seventh grade years, and I really enjoyed that, both acting, and I got to write a play that actually got produced.
Oh,
I
wow.
would write scripts just for fun and short stories. So yeah, I loved performing, being part of the performing arts. My mom would direct plays that she adapted from like children's stories, and then work with children's groups to put them on. So it was around, and my parents would act in community theater. So I was around theater. I was around that kind of like community scale show
Sure.
business. So I'd said at different times, like, "Hey, this looks kind of neat. What if we
Mhm.
were to, explore this a little bit?" And they're like, "No, we're not going to do that."
Right.
Because my mom
Yeah.
was a teacher, very much a respected thing to do at the time, and my
Mhm.
dad was a systems engineer. He worked for a defense subcontracting company with a PhD in applied math. That he went to Harvard on a full ride. So,
Right.
it's
Everything very
like
stable.
everything very stable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely. And it's interesting because, I struggle with this with my kids sometimes. We see what seems like the right path based on the experiences we've had in the world that we know right now. And it kind of comes back to that what we were talking about earlier about the world that they're entering. And you have to step back as a parent and not put your experience on your kids, knowing that, when you were coming up, your parents wouldn't have known about a podcast or internet or social media or any other outlets where entertainment could become a feasible opportunity in a completely different way for many more people than it had in the past.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No,
and
that's so true.
obviously were doing things in that industry long before podcasting and internet became a thing, so you were able to make your way as well. But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing is I thought I was going to be a doctor because I was one of those kids that had straight A's,
Mhm.
so I ended up graduating high school with like a 4.2 or 4.4 grade point average because of like, advanced classes that I took. And when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I couldn't think of anything that really made sense other than like, I'll be a doctor because I've
Right.
got doctors in the family. So whenever I would say that, people would go, "Oh, that's so great." And
It's admirable. Go for it. You're smart.
yeah,
You can
exactly. Kind of, pat me on the back or whatever. And it felt good, but it didn't feel really genuine to me when I would say that. And so I ended up going to do one of the UC, University of California schools, and it just didn't work the way I thought it was going to work. Like, I
Mhm.
did well in my first quarter there in French and visual arts, but I barely squeaked by in math to get an A, only because it was all review for the most part. We started getting into some new things that I hadn't studied in calculus, toward the end of the class, and I was kind of lost. And I took chemistry, and once we got into oxidation reduction equations, again, I just could not process. And part of it was I was going through kind of a stressful time because of a relationship that failed, and that kind
Mhm.
of thing. And my parents and I weren't getting along as well as we had in the past. So there was that.
Yeah.
Um, and so after a quarter at the college, I ended up quitting school,
Mhm.
which my mom had a master's, my dad had his PhD. Again, family full of doctors and lawyers and
Yeah.
folks who are very well educated. I was you talk about families where they're the first person to go to college. I
Mhm.
was the first person not to go to college.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
a
that was awkward.
definitely. How did you step through that?
Well, I moved to Seattle.
Okay.
For one thing, I decided to just take a reboot of my life. I came to Seattle because I have an uncle who lives here. I came here with my family during the summertime in August, like a couple years before, and I was just blown away by the Pacific Northwest and just how beautiful it is here. I really like the city of Seattle because there was a lot to do, and when I didn't know what to do with my life, since I just felt kind of overwhelmed at college, I figured, well, instead of feeling depressed and that, I was all kind of suicidal actually at the time in a way, I thought I'm gonna move to Seattle and just start fresh and we'll see what happens. So when I was in high school and when I was going to college, I worked in a men's retail clothing shop. So I thought, okay, I'm going to find a retail job or something that's like that. And I ended up getting a job in a bank as a teller when I moved to Seattle. At the time, it was really affordable to live in Seattle. So I got an apartment on Capitol Hill for like $300 a month with utilities included. And I was able to find a teller job that paid me like $7 an hour, which
which paid for an apartment at that point.
It did, which is amazing if you think about it now. This was a while ago, but I started doing that and immediately got bored being a teller. So what I did was when people would line up and come to my window, if they had any kind of accent, because I love taking foreign languages. So I learned French and I learned Spanish. So if I could tell that someone could speak either French or Spanish based on their accent, I would do the entire transaction in French or in Spanish.
Wow.
And I would do it quick. I'd make sure that everybody was like in and out in 90 seconds. So I counted the money really quick and didn't make any mistakes and sent people on their way. Or if it seemed like they had a sense of humor, I would kind of riff on them like in a Jerry Seinfeld kind of way, where I would say something like, okay, why are we as slightly overdeveloped apes standing with this artificial barrier separating us, passing colored paper back and forth? I mean, what is going on here?
Right.
So I would do stuff like that. And what happened was after about a month or two, people started lining up just to come to my window.
Wow.
And there were times where the other tellers in the bank had nothing to do. There was no customers waiting for them, but I had like 5 or 6 people waiting to come see me.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's just what I did, and I found that interesting. So me being all of 19 at the time, I thought that I knew something about customer service and how to make banking more interesting for everybody. So I kind of wrote a little Jerry Maguire-esque manifesto on how to improve customer service.
Awesome.
Like a 4-page document about how we all can make things more memorable for our customers. And I printed out 32 copies of this thing and just handed it out around the bank branch without talking to my branch manager first.
Oh.
And she fired me for it.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, granted, she found an excuse of something else that happened.
Right. Yeah. That's how it works. It's your dress code's a little off or whatever. You find the reasons, but yeah.
Yeah. In this case, it was I needed to take an extra day off around a holiday weekend because I wanted to see my ex-girlfriend in Florida. But that's a whole other story.
Right.
But still, that was the fuel that gave her the impetus to fire me, but it was based on that manifesto that I passed around without talking to her. So I got fired from the bank job. I found another job. Eventually, I couldn't find any other banking jobs that were within walking distance of Capitol Hill where I was living. So I ended up getting into politics. I was one of those field canvassers where I would like knock on your door and tell you about this nonprofit organization that is fighting for education in this case. And so I did that over one of the most brutal winters we've ever had in Seattle, where there was like 2 feet of snow on the ground, and I'd be out for 5 hours at a time, and there'd be dogs who would be chasing me or crazy people at the door that I'd be knocking on. And, like sometimes when it was really cold, I would hope that somebody would invite me in and like give me tea.
Right.
It was really, really cold. It was like that little Matt's Girl story. If you remember that from back in the day. That's a really hard job to be a field canvasser in the wintertime, and just in general, like pounding the pavement for 4 hours a day, every day. And that was a whole other experience that was fascinating in its own way, but just hard. So I quit. And after I moved to Seattle, my dad would come up periodically on business, and he did before I moved there too. It was just something that he did. Worked with Boeing, as part of a partnership agreement. And so he and I sort of mended our relationship, and he would take me out to dinner to kind of get to know me as an adult now, or young adult. And so after I quit my job working in political field canvassing, he asked me, "So, son, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" And I'd always had a plan. This was the first time I did not have a plan.
Okay.
So I tried to like visualize, okay, what am I going to be doing 5 years from now? What is my life going to look like? And all I could see was like blackness, just dark, a void, an abyss.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I looked at my dad and I said, "Gosh, I don't know, dead." Which is exactly, as a father, that's the last thing you want to hear. No. So that was awkward.
For sure. How did he respond to that?
He was also awkward. He kind of looked at me like, "Really?" I don't remember exactly what, how we sort of ended that conversation. I just remember him being taken aback. Mm-hmm. And, I probably changed the subject, or he did, just to kind of move on from there.
Right.
But that night I could not sleep because it really bothered me that I didn't know what I was going to do. And I felt this pressure because, political field canvassing doesn't pay a lot, just like being a bank teller doesn't pay a lot. So it's not like I had a ton in savings that I could just lean back on for a while.
Right.
So I was literally like going back through all of the things I've done in my life to see what are the patterns here? What can I do? And so I was thinking about, okay, I liked working at the bank because I enjoyed the customer service. I enjoyed working in clothing stores because I got to interact with the public. I liked the idea of being a doctor because I liked the idea of helping people. I liked doing public speaking competitions in high school. And so I'm like thinking of all these things that I liked, or aspects of jobs that I've done. And it just seemed to me that what I liked to do more than anything else was to talk to people. And so then I was thinking to myself, okay, I like to talk to people. How can I get paid to talk to people?
Right.
And I just noodled on that for a while, and then this light bulb went off, and it was saying I should get into talk radio, because then you're getting paid to talk to people.
Right.
So after tossing and turning all night, I got up in the morning and I pulled out the Yellow Pages. This is dating myself.
Right.
And
I remember those.
Yes, the Yellow Pages had 2 radio broadcasting schools in Seattle. And so I called both of them once it was late enough in the day to do so. And only one of them sent me information. It was called the National Broadcasting School. And I called up my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to go to radio school. I know you'd set aside some money for my college education. Would you mind if we sort of redirect that toward this radio school?" And I think my dad was so relieved that I didn't want to kill myself that
there was at least something.
That's right, that there was at least something. He said, "Okay."
Nice.
And so that's how I learned how to do radio.
Wow. Now, and that's an amazing lesson for you to be able to sit there that evening, sleepless in Seattle, literally.
Yeah.
Like, trying to come up with what to do. Most people don't have that thought process till later on in life, if at all, where they can say, this is what I liked from this job or this experience, and how do I piece those together? So that's an amazing gift that you were able to identify that early on and step into it with purpose.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. I mean, I was 19, so it's not like a lot of years had gone by. Now it's one thing to identify what it is you want to do, and it's another thing to actually make it happen.
Sure.
So yeah, I went to radio school. It was a 6-month program. The National Broadcasting School doesn't exist anymore. But it was a good facility that they had in downtown Seattle. They had 2 radio stations that you could practice at, that had like, a transmitter that maybe reached a block or 2. So I mean, it wasn't like it was very like super low power transmitters, but it was actual radio stations, and they had production studios where you could practice editing and that kind of thing. You learn how to write newscasts. You learn how to be a disc jockey. And then at the end of the 6-month program, they teach you how to write a resume and create an audition tape and teach you how to send
Get
it
yourself out there
and put yourself out there. Exactly. So I did everything that I was supposed to do. I think I graduated valedictorian of my class and ended up sending out like 100 or more audition tapes and resumes. So I thought, okay, I'm valedictorian of my class. This should be easy. But I only got one interview from those 100 plus tapes and resumes that I sent out. And it was in Wenatchee, on the other side of the Cascade Mountains.
3.5 hours, 3 hours from Seattle for those who are not from around here, over a mountain pass.
Yep, 3.5 hours with no traffic. So it was the dead of winter. I think it was January or something when I got this interview request. And so I didn't own a car. That's the other thing. So I would either take the bus or walk everywhere in Seattle. So I had to rent a car, and I had to go over a mountain pass in the wintertime to get to this interview. I got to the pass, and guess what? It was snowing. There were chains required in order to go over. So I didn't own a car. I certainly didn't own tire chains. Right. But, fortunately, there happened to be a guy in a tow truck on the side of the road selling chains for $40.
Wow.
And thank goodness I had my checkbook with me again, dating myself. And I wrote him a check for $40. He put the chains on so that I could get over the pass. I was an hour late to my interview because of all of this, because I didn't anticipate having to deal with that. There were no cell phones at the time, so it's not like I could just, pull over to the side of the road or use my Bluetooth speaker and call the program director of the little station in Wenatchee that I was going to. So I ended up showing up an hour late. Fortunately, I explained the situation, and that was not as big of a deal as I was afraid it was going to be. We had what I thought was a very nice interview. He ended up putting me up for the night in a motel in Wenatchee that, I didn't have to pay for, which was nice. And I thought, okay, well, I should be able to get this radio job. And so I drove back over the pass. Fortunately, we didn't need chains to get back because I didn't want to have to put them on myself. I had interview clothes on. It's not like I was
Yeah, you weren't planning to necessarily spend the night.
He wasn't planning to spend the night. Wasn't planning to have to put on tire chains. So it was really, really nice. There was the guy in the tow truck to help me. So I get back over the pass and I'm thinking, all right, I got this. And then nothing. So I didn't hear back at all. Maybe 2 weeks later, I got a call from the program director that said, sorry, we ended up hiring somebody else. And I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I was like, well, there goes my dream. So I ended up getting another bank job. There was fortunately a credit union that was within walking distance that I was able to work at. I did the same thing that I did before at the bank, where I was enjoying the customer interactions. One of the customers that ended up coming up to my window ended up eventually becoming my wife. So that was kind of interesting.
Things happen for a reason,
I guess. I mean, that's another story. But after working at the credit union for a couple of months and hearing no response from any of the resumes and audition tapes that I'd sent out of the blue, I got this phone call from the radio station in Wenatchee. And it was the program director that I talked to. And he said, hey, I really appreciated meeting you a couple of months ago. I wanted to let you know that we have one of our employees who does overnights and weekends. He is going to go on a cruise to Norway with his dad for 6 weeks. Would you like to fill in for him?
Oh, wow. And
so, I mean, this is the only shot that I'm thinking of that I've got to make my career. So I'm thinking, heck yeah, count me in, I'm doing this. And he said, okay, well, you can stay in his apartment. So it's not like you'll need to find a place to stay. And the apartment is walking distance from the radio station. So it should be really convenient for you. So it seemed like a great opportunity. He paid me like minimum wage. I mean, literally like $3.35 an hour. So, I mean, it was a pay cut from what I was getting at the credit union, less than half of what I was making there. And so I went to my branch manager at the credit union and I said, hey, I've always wanted to work in radio and I've got this opportunity for 6 weeks to go work in Wenatchee. Can I have a leave of absence? And I'll be back when I'm done. And she said no.
Right.
So what am I going to do? I've got a stable job with healthcare and other benefits, or do I risk it and quit my job at the credit union and take this opportunity that might not lead anywhere in a town that I really don't want to live in, but it's radio.
Right.
So I went for it. I kept my apartment on Capitol Hill because it still was pretty cheap at the time. I think it went up to like $330 a month.
Right.
So I ended up hopping on a Greyhound bus to get me over to Wenatchee and moved into this guy's apartment. It was like one of 4 units that shares a bathroom. I mean, that was
Okay.
awkward.
Yeah.
For sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And yeah, and did the job for 6 weeks. I got to practice reading newscasts and being a DJ, and it was for an AM station and an FM station. So I got a lot of experience packed into those 6 weeks.
Mhm.
I even had to deal with crazy phone callers who would call you at 2 a.m. wanting to do phone sex. That was awkward. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I think we don't realize in the moment, we have these opportunities and they seem like they're smaller opportunities because it's a smaller station in a smaller town. But because we're in a smaller business, we're learning every single aspect of that industry or that job, rather than just my job is to be on the mic and do this one thing. And that has to have set you up very well for a lot of knowledge and experience for what you stepped into from there.
yeah, it was good. I did learn a lot. And when 6 weeks were up, the program director basically said, "Thank you very much. You can, move on to whatever you're going to do next."
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't lead anywhere. I ended up coming back to Seattle. I looked for work, couldn't find any. But then after about 3 months, and I don't know how I made it, I think I borrowed some money from my parents, actually, is what I did. I found a weekend job at a station in Seattle. It turned out that those 6 weeks in Wenatchee was just enough experience for me to get hired by this station in Seattle, King News Talk 1090 at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, King AM, which was in the King TV building, and that was super cool.
Yeah.
So I got to do that. I had to find a job that paid more than $4 an hour, which that one was, and that had health benefits and could actually cover my rent, because just 8 hours a day on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, wasn't enough to do that.
Right.
So I found a job selling traveler's checks at the AAA, which was a full-time job. So I was working 7 days a week in order to keep the radio dream alive.
Yeah. You made a comment when you didn't get the job in Wenatchee the first time that there goes my dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we all sit in that space sometimes where we do the things, we go to the school, we send off the tapes, the resumes, and then we don't get the results, and we think that was our shot.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what did that, you went back to the bank and you kind of set it aside and you were waiting for the other things, but did you really give up, or was there any other chance where you were thought, well, maybe there's more action I can take, maybe there's something else I can do?
Honestly, I thought I was done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
It was sad. Honestly. It was worse, I think, than having to give up football.
Sure.
Because this was my career. This was my epiphany that I was going to get paid to talk to people. I mean, I didn't think that my life was completely ruined at that point, because I was enjoying working at the bank again. I felt like, okay, at least I have a job. At least I'm financially independent from my parents. I'm able to cover the rent. I'm able to have health insurance. I've got enough money to go out for dinner once a week, just to enjoy the city a little bit and go to movies and stuff like that, have a life. So I figured this is going to lead me somewhere. I just don't know where.
Okay. That's why I was just wondering if there was a specific lesson that came from that, from having the rejection, but then later having an opportunity come up from it, even though it didn't turn into a full-time job in Wenatchee. What would you say would be your biggest lesson from that beginning process?
Have faith, really trust that things will be okay one way or another is really the takeaway that I had, because after the 6-week job ended, I really didn't have any prospects. I did, when I got back to Seattle, look for jobs in banking like I had before, or jobs in retail that I thought would cover the rent again, thinking sort of short term at age, I think I was 20 at the time, almost. Yeah, no, I was 20. But, thinking that somehow it was going to work out. Again, just not knowing exactly what that would look like. But one of the things that happened was, as a result of the radio school that I went to, I was invited to do some work for this was a long time ago. This was the Goodwill Games that Seattle was hosting.
Yeah.
It's like Seattle and Russian athletes, or U.S. and Russian athletes, at the University of Washington campus, in the Husky Stadium. There was events and things. So I signed up to do work with them because one of my radio instructors at the National Broadcasting School had connections there. So I went to a couple of planning meetings. They gave me a check for $1,000 to do this. And so with that $1,000, I ended up buying my first suit because I thought, okay, I should buy a suit that I would use for interviews. So I went ahead and did that. And so I had this suit. And then when the job opened up in Seattle, that part-time weekend thing, I put on my suit that I bought from the Goodwill Games, again, which I really didn't do any work for, but somehow it appeared. And I think because I presented myself well from the experience I'd had with public speaking and just customer interface and helping people feel relaxed and that kind of thing, I think that's why I got the job. The program director kind of took a chance on me, knowing that I only had 6 weeks of real experience.
Right.
So yeah, it's that trust that things are going to be okay was really the thing.
Yeah. Now, before we head out, I do want to hear a little bit about, how people can really get to know you on your show, and what's the story behind the Arik Korman Show, and tell us what you have going on. So maybe a couple quick lessons on what you've learned from some of the guests you've had over the years, because your goal there really is to learn from others. And so you're taking this passion to talk to people to the next level by really having great conversations with your show.
Yeah. So yeah, the Arik Korman Show, it's on iHeartRadio, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify. So just search the Arik Korman Show, or you can just go to Arik, spelled ARIK, online.com. So arikonline.com. That'll take you to the iHeartRadio page. So the premise of my show is that I am on a journey to learn from superhumans, people who have done remarkable things or have remarkable ideas to share, so that, as you said, I can be the best dad I can for my son. So it's been a fantastic journey. I've been doing this show now it'll be 10 years in July.
Wow.
So that's been a long time. And I feel very fortunate that from working in radio in Seattle for as many years as I did, I was able to develop contacts with publishing houses in New York and venues like Seattle Theater Group here in Seattle, for example, and Town Hall, so that I can either be notified of guests that are available, or if I see someone that's coming through town that I want to talk to, I can reach out to them and they'll listen and help me arrange the interview. So I've talked to people recently, like comedian Louis Black, who you might remember from, there's a Pixar movie called Inside Out, and he played the voice of anger in there. And he's been doing stand-up comedy for like 40 years, a very, very long time. And so we talked about his journey and what that looked like, and finding one's passion and not giving up. So, learning about what worked for him, again, trying to pull lessons from people in his sphere and just not giving up. That was a big one. The last interview I posted was with Virginia Johnson. She's the artistic director of Dance Theater of Harlem, and considered an iconic ballerina, because she had a career that lasted like 30 years. I mean, it's as a ballet dancer, that's really unusual.
Right. Yeah.
So I asked her, like, what do you suggest that young people do to follow their dreams? And she said, be curious more than anything. And the other thing is you need to work hard because it's not going to just fall into your lap. You've got to earn it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a big one. I talked recently to the chief speechwriter for Barack Obama. His name is Cody Keenan. And I said to him, okay, for our kids who want to make a difference in the world or are not sure how to engage in the political process, what kind of advice would you give? And he said, what young people should do is pick an issue or two issues that they care about more than anything else. It could be climate change, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's time to vote, what you want to do is look at the candidates that are on the ballot and see how they stand on your issue. So vote the issue, don't vote the personality. And so if you're always voting your issue, then you'll make sure that it's getting worked on the way that you want it to be worked on.
Yeah, that's a great advice, because I think even older people could use that reminder of how is it that you're choosing to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I've talked to Brian Greene, the astrophysicist, and I've talked to him about, okay, so how do we think about our place in the universe? And and he says, look for the wonder. I mean, the fact that we're even here, that there's such a tiny chance that we could even exist. Find the wow factor of how big the universe is and that we even get to be part of it.
Right.
So that's one way of lifting up above of any day-to-day challenges that we're facing. So that's one perspective that I'll try to use for myself, and also help my son get over whatever he's going through. So look,
it's such a
think about how random it is that we even exist.
Right. Yeah, and it's such a great lesson because you have such a range of diversity in guests with their experience, their backgrounds, and what's so beautiful about that, and I try to surround myself with people like that as well, from every different walk of life, because all of those lessons come together to give us a different perspective and a different way to feed that curiosity, where you say, okay, if I'm curious and I'm learning as much as I can, I have to be open to hear it from as many different angles as possible. That's the only way you really can feed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And because everybody brings their own perspective, whether it's an actor or a sports figure or a musician or a scientist or somebody in the news, Salman Rushdie, for example. I got a chance to talk to him, which was amazing.
Definitely. Yeah.
Very humble guy, which I did not expect. Or somebody like Robert Reich, the Secretary of Labor under Clinton, who teaches at Berkeley. And he was the one who said, if you're ever feeling down, talk to young people. They'll pick you right up.
Oh, I love that. That's a great perspective. My mentor, I meet with him every week. He's 88, and I have people, I do a little stand-up and stuff. So I have people in my scene that are anywhere from 16, 18, and then my kids and their friends. And it's just amazing to see the range of personality, inspiration, and also foresight from people at every level. So I love it. Now, Eric, before we go, I could talk to you for hours. I'm loving these all these stories you're sharing. As you were talking about going over the past to Wenatchee and the phone book and the not having a cell phone, I was having this flashback to how many things, how different life was back then, and how we don't realize how much technology has changed. Like, you couldn't just hop on a Zoom interview and say, let's do this interview from 4 hours away via Zoom or however we want to do it. So it's really been kind of a trip down memory lane of what life has been like over the years. But before we go, what would be one last piece of advice that you would leave for people on how they could really step in and own their awkward?
I would say know yourself, as much as you can. Find what it is that lights you up. My son, over the weekend, actually, he gave me a new term, which is try hard. So I thought, okay, what's try hard? And I thought it was somebody who is trying too hard to be something they're not. Mm-hmm. But no, he said a try hard is somebody who finds that thing that they're really good at, and they just do that thing better than anybody else. Oh. So he said, like, for example, one of my classmates is super fast, and so he can outrun everybody. So he's a try hard at track and field. And then There's somebody on my ultimate frisbee team who's like really good at ultimate frisbee, so he's better than everybody else at ultimate frisbee, so he's the try hard there. And so over the weekend, I was emceeing an auction, and I told my son that I'm gonna MC this auction, and he said, "Dad, why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, I enjoy getting in front of people and emceeing events. I guess that's my try hard."
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, find your try hard. What do you do better than anything else, or what do you want to do better than anybody else that you think you can actually achieve?
Right. I love that. I have not heard that term, because I would have interpreted it the same way that you did at first, where it's someone who's, trying too hard to be something. But I love that, because it comes down to that, what you're passionate about, what you want to do, and then lining that up with your skills. So it's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Eric, and everybody listening. Be sure that you click on the links to go listen to his show, check out his website, give him all the support. And when you're doing that, be sure to like, comment, and share on his stuff so that it can get out there in the world. Because when we're putting stuff out there too, as podcasting and hosting shows, we don't always see if it helps people. So unless someone's giving us that feedback, we're just going through our day, putting sound out there and hoping that it's making a difference. So I know for me, it makes a big difference when I hear something. I'm sure it's the same for you.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Eric. It's been a great pleasure.
And thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent. And everybody else, be sure as always to own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.